Part 1. The stars had always been quiet for the collective. In 10,000 years of expansion across the galaxy, they had visited hundreds of worlds and claimed 63 of them for their labor networks. The pattern was always the same. They would find a planet with primitive life, descend from the sky in their great ships, and watch the natives scatter like insects before a storm. Resistance was rare. Successful resistance was unknown. First, Al stood on the observation deck of his flagship, the Eternal Harvest, and watched the blue planet grow larger in the viewing screen. His 4 eyes studied the swirling clouds and vast oceans, with the calm satisfaction of a predator examining easy prey. 17 cycles of observation had told him everything he needed to know about this world and its dominant species. The humans, as they called themselves, were a curious case. They had developed primitive technology at an impressive rate, moving from animal-drawn vehicles to flying machines in less than 2 centuries. But they remained bound to their single world, fighting among themselves over resources and ideology. They had no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no unified planetary government. Their most advanced weapons were crude nuclear devices that they seemed too afraid to use against each other. Most importantly, they were soft. No natural armor, no claws or fangs worth mentioning. They could not survive in extreme temperatures without artificial protection. They needed to sleep for a third of their lives. By every metric the collective used to assess threat levels, humans ranked somewhere between harmless and pathetic. "Begin the descent," Al ordered. "Deploy ground teams to the northern continent. Standard acquisition protocol." The acquisition fleet broke through Earth's atmosphere on a clear autumn morning. 12 massive ships descended over what the humans called North America, their shadow falling across forests and farmland like a promise of change to come. Smaller landing craft separated from the main vessels, carrying teams of soldiers equipped with plasma rifles and stun technology. The goal was simple: establish control, neutralize resistance, begin the harvest of human labor. Ground Team 7 touched down near a small human settlement in a region called Montana. Squad leader checked his equipment and led his 12 soldiers toward the cluster of primitive wooden structures. The humans had already seen them coming. Some were running toward vehicles. Others were shouting into small devices they held to their heads. A few simply stood and stared, their mouths hanging open in what assumed was fear. "Standard formation," ordered. "Stun the runners, secure the buildings." His team advanced with practiced efficiency. They had done this dozens of times on dozens of worlds. The plasma rifles hummed with charged energy, ready to fire. The humans scattered before them like prey animals, just as expected. Then heard a sound he did not recognize, a sharp crack, like a branch breaking but much louder. One of his soldiers stumbled and fell. Looked down and saw a hole in the soldier's armor, right through the chest plate. Purple blood was spreading across the ground. Another crack, another soldier fell. Spun toward the source of the sound. A human stood in the doorway of one of the wooden buildings, holding a long metal tube. Smoke rose from one end. The human's face was calm, almost peaceful, as it pointed the tube at and pulled a small lever. The impact knocked backward. Pain exploded through his shoulder as he hit the ground. Through blurring vision, he saw his remaining soldiers firing plasma bolts at the building. The human ducked inside. More humans appeared at windows, more metal tubes in their hands. The cracking sounds came faster now, from multiple directions. Managed to activate his communication device. "Team 7 to flagship. We are under heavy fire. Request immediate support. The natives have weapons. Repeat, the natives have weapons that can penetrate standard armor." He never received a response. A final crack, and squad leader knew nothing more. Across the continent, similar reports flooded the communication network. Ground Team 3 encountered a group of humans in blue uniforms who fought with disciplined coordination, using vehicles as cover and communicating through hand signals. Ground Team 12 found itself surrounded by armed humans who emerged from the forest like ghosts, striking and vanishing before the soldiers could return fire. Ground Team 9 landed near a large building filled with weapons for sale, and not a single soldier survived the first 10 minutes. First, Al listened to the reports with growing disbelief. The humans were not scattering. They were not surrendering. They were fighting back with a ferocity that all predictions, and they were winning. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Our scans showed no military presence in these areas. These are civilian populations." His tactical officer, a veteran of 30 acquisitions, studied the incoming data with all four eyes wide. "Sir, it appears that human civilians possess military-grade weapons. Their social structure allows private ownership of projectile weapons. Some of these humans have personal arsenals that exceed the armament of our entire ground teams." "That is insane," Al said. "What kind of species arms its general population?" "A dangerous one, sir." By the 6th hour of the invasion, Al had lost contact with 40% of his ground forces. The number kept climbing. Worse still, the humans were not just defending themselves. They were organizing. Their primitive communication network, which the collective had dismissed as easily, proved resilient beyond all expectation. Humans across the planet were sharing information in real time, coordinating responses, adapting tactics. A human military force arrived at one of the landing sites with armored vehicles and aircraft. They should not have been able to respond so quickly. The collective's analysts had predicted at least 3 days before any organized military response, but the humans had mobilized in hours. Their aircraft engaged landing craft with missiles that, while crude, proved devastatingly effective in sufficient numbers. Al watched the battle feeds with a cold knot forming in his stomach. This was wrong. All of this was wrong. The humans should have been paralyzed with fear. They should have been begging for mercy, offering submission in exchange for survival. Instead, they were treating this invasion like a challenge to be overcome. One feed showed a human settlement where the residents had formed a defensive line using their personal vehicles as barriers. They fired their projectile weapons with accuracy that suggested extensive training. When soldiers breached the line, the humans engaged them in close combat, fighting with knives, tools, and their bare hands. Several humans died, but they took soldiers with them, clawing and biting even as plasma burns consumed their flesh. "They do not fear death," the tactical officer observed quietly. "They fight as if dying in battle is preferable to surrender." "That cannot be," Al said. "Self-preservation is the most basic instinct. No species fights like this." "This one does, sir." The worst development came in Hour 8. Ground Team 15 had been wiped out near a human research facility. When recovery teams arrived to collect the bodies and equipment, they found that the humans had already taken everything. The bodies were gone. The weapons were gone. The armor, the communication devices, the power cells, all gone. The humans were not just fighting, they were learning. Al ordered an immediate tactical withdrawal. All surviving ground forces were to return to orbit at once. The invasion was suspended pending reassessment. As his shuttle lifted away from the planet's surface, he looked down at the land below and tried to understand what had gone wrong. The preliminary scans had been accurate. The humans had no energy shields, no plasma weapons, no unified government. But the scans had missed something crucial. They had measured technology and resources. They had not measured spirit. The humans had spent their entire existence at war, not with other species but with themselves. They had refined the art of killing over thousands of years, developing weapons and tactics that their biology should never have required. They did not fight for survival in the way other species did. They fought because fighting was woven into their very nature. War was not a last resort for humans. It was a cultural institution. And now, for the first time in their violent history, humanity had a common enemy. As Al's shuttle docked with the Eternal Harvest, his communication officer reported something that made his blood run cold. Human broadcast signals were flooding the planet's airwaves. The invasion was no longer a local event. It was global news. Humans on every continent now knew that aliens had attacked their world. And they were angry. Al looked at the beautiful blue planet through the observation deck viewport. Somewhere down there, humans were studying equipment with hungry curiosity. Somewhere down there, human scientists were already working to understand alien technology. Somewhere down there, a species that had gone from horse-drawn carts to nuclear weapons in 200 years was applying that terrifying adaptability to a new challenge. The Apex Predator Protocol existed for situations exactly like this. It was a warning system, a way to classify species that posed genuine threats to the collective's dominance. In 10,000 years, it had been triggered only twice. But Al hesitated. Triggering the protocol would mean admitting defeat. It would mean abandoning this sector of space permanently. It would mean telling the collective that the mighty had been driven back by a species of soft, slow, primitive creatures who had never even left their own world. Surely there was another way. Surely, with proper preparation, the humans could still be conquered. First, Al made his decision. He would wait. He would observe. He would find the humans' weakness. It was the worst mistake of his life. Part 2. 3 months had passed since the day humanity learned it was not alone in the universe. 3 months since alien ships had descended from the sky and tried to harvest human beings like cattle. 3 months since the world had changed forever. Admiral Way stood in the command center of United Earth Defense, a facility that had not existed 90 days ago. The bunker had been built in record time, carved into a mountain in neutral territory by workers from 30 different nations. Above her head, holographic displays showed the positions of the fleet in orbit, their movements tracked by a network of satellites that had been hastily repurposed for military observation. The holographic technology itself was new. It had been reverse-engineered from captured equipment in just 11 weeks. "Status report," Admiral said. Colonel stepped forward, his uniform bearing the new emblem of United Earth Defense, a blue circle representing the planet, surrounded by a ring of stars representing the enemy they faced. "All sectors report readiness, Admiral. Resistance cells confirm active operations on every continent. Production facilities operating at 200% capacity. Morale remains high." High was an understatement. In her 30 years of military service, Admiral had never seen anything like the current state of human civilization. Old enemies had become allies overnight. Nations that had spent decades pointing weapons at each other now shared intelligence freely. Scientists who had competed for grants and glory now collaborated on projects that would have seemed like science fiction just months ago. Fear had united humanity for the first 72 hours. Then something else had taken over, something that surprised even the most cynical observers of human nature. Enthusiasm. Humanity was not just defending itself against the alien threat. It was embracing the challenge with a fervor that bordered on joy. The invasion had given the species something it had been missing for generations, a common purpose. Every factory worker who built weapons felt like a soldier. Every scientist who studied captured technology felt like a hero. Every citizen who reported movements felt like a spy in an epic struggle. They had expected to find a divided species, easy to conquer through fear and superior technology. Instead, they had kicked a hornet's nest. Admiral walked to the central display and studied the enemy fleet. 12 ships remained in orbit, maintaining a careful distance from Earth's surface. They had not attempted another ground assault since the disastrous first day. Their scouts occasionally descended into the atmosphere, gathering information, but they fled at the first sign of resistance. The aliens were afraid. The thought still amazed her. "What is the status of Project Prometheus?" she asked. Colonel smiled. "Ahead of schedule, Admiral. The first 3 vessels will be ready for launch within the month. Doctor's team has successfully integrated propulsion technology with our existing nuclear arsenal. The test flight exceeded all expectations. 3 months ago, humanity had never built a spacecraft capable of leaving Earth's orbit for extended periods. Now they were constructing warships. The speed of adaptation, all rational expectation. But Admiral had learned to stop being surprised by what humans could accomplish when properly motivated. The key had been the captured technology. When the ground teams were destroyed, they left behind equipment that human scientists fell upon like starving wolves. Power cells that contained more energy than a nuclear reactor. Propulsion systems that bent the laws of physics. Communication devices that operated faster than light. Human engineers did not fully understand how any of it worked. They did not need to. Understanding could come later. For now, they focused on replication and integration. They took alien parts and made them work with human machines. They studied alien code and found ways to exploit its weaknesses. The hackers had been particularly effective. Within weeks of the invasion, a global collective of computer experts had cracked the basic encryption of communication systems. They could not read everything, but they could read enough. Fleet movements, supply routes, the locations of other ships beyond the solar system. Most importantly, they had found the star charts. Admiral pulled up the relevant display. A three-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared, marked with hundreds of points of light. 63 of those points were highlighted in red, worlds that the collective had conquered and harvested. 63 species living under alien occupation. The strategic implications were staggering. If humanity could make contact with those worlds, they might find allies. They might find resources. They might find the key to defeating the collective entirely. But first, they had to deal with the fleet in orbit. "Has there been any response to our communication attempts?" Admiral asked. "Negative, Admiral. They continue to ignore all hails. They seem to be waiting for something." Nodded. She had expected as much. The aliens were trying to figure out what to do next. Their standard playbook had failed, and they were struggling to adapt. It was a weakness that humans understood well. They had seen it in their own militaries throughout history, the paralysis that came when carefully laid plans fell apart. The difference was that humans had learned to embrace chaos. They had a saying for it: no plan survives contact with the enemy. Doctrine apparently had no equivalent concept. A young officer approached with a tablet. "Admiral, we're receiving reports from the European sector. Civilian volunteers have captured another scout craft. The pilot survived and is being transported for questioning." "Excellent. Make sure the science teams get full access to the wreckage and treat the prisoner humanely. We are not savages." This was another aspect of the human response that had surprised the aliens. They expected humans to either submit or fight to the death. They did not expect mercy. When captured soldiers were treated with basic dignity, given medical care and adequate food, they became confused. Some eventually became cooperative. Humanity was learning about its enemy through kindness, as well as violence. The intelligence gathered from prisoners had painted a disturbing picture of the collective. It was an empire built on conquest and slavery. The 63 harvested worlds provided labor for industries and agriculture. The conquered species were not exterminated, but they were not free either. They lived as servants, their cultures suppressed, their potential limited. The thought made Admiral's jaw tighten with anger. Somewhere out there, billions of beings lived in chains because they had decided they were weak enough to be taken. Humanity would not join them. "Admiral," another officer called out, "we have new telemetry from the observation satellites. The flagship is moving." Turn to the main display. The largest ship in the enemy fleet was indeed changing position, moving away from its stationary orbit toward a higher altitude. Other ships were following. "Are they retreating?" Colonel asked. "I don't think so," said slowly. "They're repositioning. Look at the formation. They're establishing a blockade pattern. It made sense. They could not conquer Earth through ground assault, but they could try to contain humanity on it. If they prevented humans from leaving the planet, they could wait for reinforcements. They could starve Earth of resources. They could buy time to develop new tactics. What they did not know was that humanity had already prepared for this possibility. "Initiate Operation Looking Glass," Admiral ordered. "All frequencies, all channels, make sure they hear us." The communication officers went to work. Within moments, a signal was broadcasting on every frequency they were known to monitor. It was not a surrender. It was not a plea for negotiation. It was an announcement. Admiral's voice carried across the void of space. "Attention, fleet. This is Admiral Way of United Earth Defense. 3 of our vessels will be launching within the hour. They carry nuclear weapons modified with propulsion technology recovered from your forces. We suggest you reconsider your blockade formation." She paused to let the words sink in. "You came to our world expecting easy prey. You found something else entirely. We are not a species that surrenders. We are not a species that forgives. We are humanity, and we have been waiting for you for a very long time. Your move." The channel closed. Colonel stared at her. "Admiral, the ships won't actually be ready for another 3 weeks." Smiled slightly. "They don't know that, and right now they're not certain of anything about us. Let them wonder, let them worry. Fear is a weapon too." On the display, the fleet had stopped its repositioning. The ships hung motionless in space, as if uncertain what to do next. Above Earth, first Al received the transmission and felt something he had not experienced in centuries of conquest. Doubt. The humans were bluffing. They had to be bluffing. No species could develop space-capable warships in 3 months. It was impossible. But everything about humans was supposed to be impossible. They were supposed to be soft and weak. They were supposed to scatter and surrender. They were supposed to be grateful for the opportunity to serve the collective. Instead, they were threatening nuclear retaliation from ships that should not exist. Al looked at the blue planet and wondered, not for the first time, what kind of species the collective had awakened. Part 3. 1 year had passed since the collective attempted to harvest Earth. First, Al stood on the bridge of his crippled flagship and watched the impossible unfold before his eyes. Human vessels surrounded what remained of his fleet, their hulls painted with symbols and words he had learned to recognize over the past 12 months. Nations that had been at war with each other for centuries now flew together under a single banner. United Earth, the symbols read, Humanity United. The humans had built a space fleet in 1 year. Not makeshift shuttles or converted civilian craft, but actual warships. They bristled with weapons that combined human nuclear technology with energy systems. Their engines burned with the same faster-than-light capability that the collective had spent developing. In 12 months, humans had compressed centuries of technological advancement into a single desperate push for survival. First, his communications officer said, voice trembling, "The human vessels are hailing us. They are demanding our surrender." Al did not respond. He was trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. The reinforcements he had requested never came. The collective had other priorities, other harvests to conduct. They had assured him that the humans would eventually exhaust themselves, that their primitive industrial base could not sustain prolonged resistance. They had been wrong about everything. Earth's industrial output had not declined during the war. It had increased. Human factories operated around the clock, producing weapons and ships and equipment at a pace that logic. Their population had not collapsed under the stress of invasion. It had mobilized. Every human on the planet seemed to have found a purpose in the war effort. And the worst part was the creativity. The collective's military doctrine was built on proven tactics, refined over and applied consistently across all campaigns. Humans had no such consistency. They improvised. They experimented. They tried strategies that no rational species would consider, and sometimes those strategies worked spectacularly. 3 months ago, a single human vessel had approached the supply line under a flag of surrender. When ships moved to accept the surrender, the human vessel detonated its nuclear payload at point-blank range, destroying itself and two collective cruisers. The humans had a name for such tactics. Kamikaze, they called it, a word from one of their ancient warrior cultures. It meant divine wind. What kind of species produced individuals willing to die for the mere chance of damaging their enemies? Al had underestimated them. The entire collective had underestimated them. And now, as human warships closed in on his battered fleet, the price of that miscalculation had come due. "Sir," the communications officer pressed, "they are repeating their demand. What should I tell them?" Al looked around his bridge. His crew watched him with exhausted eyes. They had fought for a year against an enemy that refused to break. They had watched their comrades die in battles that should have been easy victories. They had seen humans do things that haunted their sleep. The war was over. It had been over for months. Al had simply refused to accept it. "Tell them," he said slowly, "that the acquisition fleet surrenders unconditionally." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. In 10,000 years, no fleet had ever surrendered to a harvest species. But then, no harvest species had ever fought like this. As his officers transmitted the surrender, Al made one final decision. He activated his personal terminal and began composing a message to the collective. It would take time to reach its destination, traveling through the faster-than-light communication network that connected space. But it needed to be sent. The Apex Predator Protocol. He had hesitated to trigger it 1 year ago. He had believed that with time and resources, the humans could still be conquered. He had been a fool. The message was simple and direct. It contained the coordinates of Earth's solar system, a summary of human capabilities, and a single classification: extinction-level threat. When the collective received this message, they would quarantine this entire sector of space. No ship would enter human territory again. The harvest of Earth would be abandoned permanently. But even as Al transmitted the warning, he knew it would not be enough. The humans were not content to defend their world. They had seen the star charts. They knew about the 63 enslaved species living under collective rule, and they were already building exploration vessels. In his message to the Al included a final warning. "The humans are coming. They will not stop at their own borders. We have awakened something terrible, and I fear we cannot put it back to sleep." Across the void of space, on the bridge of the human flagship Unity, Admiral Way watched the surrender transmission with quiet satisfaction. Around her, officers cheered and embraced. After a year of desperate fighting, humanity had won its first interstellar war. But did not join the celebration. She was already thinking about what came next. The war with they was over. The larger conflict was just beginning. "Admiral," her aide said, "we're receiving reports from all sectors. The population is celebrating. They want to know what happens now." Turned to face her crew. These men and women had served with distinction throughout the war. They had lost friends and family. They had sacrificed everything for the survival of their species. Now she had to ask them for more. "What happens now," she said, "is that we keep our promise." She pulled up the star chart on the main display. 63 worlds blinked in red, marking the locations of slave colonies. 63 species living in chains because they had been too weak or too unlucky to resist conquest. When they came to Earth, we learned something important about the universe. We learned that there are species out there who see others as nothing more than resources to be exploited. We learned that weakness is punished, that the strong prey upon the weak without mercy or hesitation. She paused, looking at the faces of her crew. But we also learned something about ourselves. We learned that humanity does not submit. We learned that when we stand together, we can accomplish the impossible. And we learned that we have a choice about what kind of species we want to be. The bridge was silent now. Everyone listened. The collective has spent 10,000 years building an empire on the backs of conquered peoples. They have never faced meaningful resistance because no one was strong enough to resist them. Until now. Pointed at the star chart. Those 63 worlds are waiting for someone to tell them that resistance is possible. They are waiting for someone to show them that the collective can be beaten. They are waiting for hope. She straightened her uniform and met the eyes of every officer in turn. Humanity will be that hope. We will travel to those worlds. We will share our technology and our knowledge. We will teach them to fight just as we learned to fight. And together, we will tear down the collective piece by piece until every enslaved being in this galaxy is free. Colonel spoke up, his voice thoughtful. Admiral, the collective controls hundreds of systems. They have resources we can barely imagine. Are you suggesting we declare war on an entire interstellar empire? I am suggesting, replied, that we do what humans have always done. We find people in chains and we break those chains. We find tyrants and we remove them. We find injustice and we answer it with fire. She smiled grimly. They came to Earth looking for slaves. Instead, they found liberators. I intend to make sure they never stop regretting that mistake. The first human exploration vessel, the Hope of Earth, launched 6 months after the surrender. It carried diplomats, scientists, soldiers, and teachers. Its mission was simple: make contact with the nearest enslaved world and begin the process of liberation. The ship's captain was a woman named, who had lost her entire family in the initial assault on Tokyo. She had spent the war fighting in the resistance, coordinating attacks through civilian communication networks. Now she would carry humanity's message to the stars. Before departure, she transmitted a simple message to Earth's population. It was broadcast on every channel, in every language, so that every human could hear. We go now into the unknown, Captain said. We go to find others who have suffered as we have suffered. We go to teach them what we have learned, that freedom is worth fighting for, that no chain is unbreakable, that hope is the most powerful weapon in the universe. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of human history. The thought we were prey, they were wrong. We are humanity. We are the species that never surrenders. We are the species that fights for the weak and stands against the strong, and we are coming. The Hope of Earth engaged its faster-than-light drive and vanished into the void. Across the galaxy, the collective received First Al's warning and activated the Apex Predator Protocol. They from human space. They established quarantine zones. They hoped that if they left the humans alone, the humans would leave them alone in return. They were wrong. Within 50 years, human ships had made contact with 30 of the 63 enslaved worlds. They shared technology freely, asking nothing in return except friendship and alliance. They trained resistance fighters and supplied weapons. They broadcast messages of hope that the collective could not block. Within 100 years, the first enslaved species had thrown off collective rule entirely. Then another, then another. The Apex Predator Protocol spread throughout the galaxy, carried by ships fleeing from sector after sector. It was no longer a warning about a single dangerous species. It had become a prophecy of the collective's downfall. The humans are coming. They cannot be stopped. They cannot be reasoned with. They will not rest until every slave is free. Run while you can. First Al lived long enough to see the beginning of the end. From his prison cell on Earth, where he was treated with the same strange mercy that humans showed all their captives, he watched the news reports of defeats and liberated worlds. He had been right about one thing. The humans were apex predators. They were the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever produced. But he had been wrong about everything else. The humans were not mindless killers. They did not seek conquest for its own sake. They fought not because they enjoyed destruction, but because they could not tolerate injustice. Their greatest strength was not their technology or their adaptability. It was their empathy. They looked at enslaved aliens and saw themselves. They heard stories of oppression and felt genuine anger. They encountered suffering and felt compelled to end it. This was what made them truly terrifying. They cared about beings they had never met, species they had no reason to protect. In the end, the collective fell not to human weapons, but to human ideals. The enslaved species who had lived in hopeless submission discovered that freedom was possible. They rose up, inspired by human example and supported by human aid. The galaxy was remade in the image of a species that had spent its entire existence fighting itself, and had finally found a worthy cause. Humanity had answered the stars, and the stars would never be the same.